I actually think you might have been one of the first podcasts I ever listened to. I
Is
got
that
into
right?
podcasts. Yeah, like because I remember
Sorry.
I started listening to. No, it was. I remember being like Order of Man was a really good name. It caught me. I was a young man. I think I was in college when I started listening to podcasts. And Order of Man, I was like, that's intriguing. Let me see. So I checked it out. Checked out your page, and I've kind of been following along ever since. I'm curious, how did Origin or Order of Man come to be? Like, what's the impetus of that whole journey for you?
I actually had another podcast. Most people don't know. I had a podcast before I started Order of Man. It was called Wealth Anatomy. And I was a financial advisor in another life about a decade ago. And I decided to start podcasting as an interesting way to send information to existing clients and then potentially pick up new clients. And I realized really, really quickly that the medium of podcasting is unbelievable. The fact that you can get in somebody's brain and their earbuds and have conversations. I remember one time it was a pediatric physician called me up and he said, "Hey, I need to buy disability insurance." I'm like, "Great, I can help you with that. Do you know what you're looking for?" And he rattled off a laundry list of features that he wanted in his disability insurance. Now, I don't know about you, but the average person doesn't know a dang thing about disability insurance.
Yeah, I have no
And
idea.
yeah. And this doctor knew everything. He knew all the features, all the benefits, all the clauses. And I was a little skeptical. I thought, well, either this guy's been shopping quite a bit, or maybe he's posing as a doctor, but he's another financial advisor trying to get information. I wasn't quite sure, but I asked him, I said, "You know a lot about disability insurance. That isn't common." He's like, "Oh, yeah." He's like, "I just listened to your podcast on disability insurance and wrote down everything you told me I needed." And for me, that was a light bulb moment where I thought, okay, I understand this. When you have these types of conversations, whether you are or not, people perceive you as being credible. And so I did that podcast. I think I did 20 episodes maybe. And then I realized I really wanted to podcast, but I didn't want to have the same financial planning conversation that I was so accustomed to having. So I in the process, I'd followed a couple other blogs like Art of Manliness and some of these other organizations that are geared towards serving men, and thought this would be interesting. I could have conversations with guys like Brett McKay and other people, and I could still podcast, but I can learn how to be a good business owner, how to be a good husband, father, etc. And so in 2015, March of 2015, I launched Order of Man, and here we are 9.5 years later. I think we've done 1,400 episodes. We're coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks on our 500th episode ever, for interviews, that is, but 1,400 total. So it's been a phenomenal ride.
Yeah, that's crazy to hear that you were that early on the podcast game. Because I think, when did Rogan start? Like 2010 or something. I mean, that you were early on that
I don't,
wave.
yeah, we were really, really early. I don't know when he started, but yeah, most people didn't really even know what a podcast was when I started. And if they did, or I told them that I had a podcast and they knew what it was, most of the time people would say, "Oh, well, what's your real job?" Because they didn't really know that this could actually be a thing. But I actually went full time with Order of Man in about a year to 15 months. I was full time and sold my financial planning practice. I've been out of that game for years and years now, because this was such an incredible opportunity, and it was something I'm passionate about, and it's something that's been pretty lucrative for me as well.
Yeah, it's the best of both worlds. I always say it's a win-win-win, and I've only been doing it for over a year. This will be my
Mm-hmm.
81st episode.
Awesome, congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a win-win-win. Like, so I selfishly get to have conversations with incredible people like yourself. The listener gets to derive value from this conversation. Hopefully, that's the goal. And then the win is also, like you said, if you do it well and you really put your mind and your effort into it, it can become a business as well. I'm
Right.
curious, going from something as stable and probably lucrative as well as financial advising and planning, what was that like, taking that jump to Order of Man full time? Because that's obviously, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there in terms of stability, I would guess.
Yeah, I wasn't when I sold my financial planning practice, I was making a little bit of money with Order of Man, maybe 1,000, maybe on a good month, a couple of thousand a month. So it was nothing that I was making relative to what I was doing with the financial planning stuff. But that actually picked up really, really quickly. And it actually increased exponentially when I went full time with it. So I replaced that income fairly quickly. The other benefit that I had is I had that financial planning practice that I sold. So I had some residual income coming in, and I got to a point where I'm like, I don't even want to do that. I just want to sell it. And I have a close personal friend. We got into the business together, who I called one day and I said, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about selling my business. Would you be interested in buying it?" He said, "Yeah, I am." So we came up with some terms that were agreeable for both of us. And I ended up selling my practice and had a little bit of a lump sum come in. And that kind of covered and floated while I was continuing to build Order of Man to what it is today.
That's awesome. I'm curious, because you said it's been almost 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
When you look back at the financial planning like what's that like looking back 10 years ago to that version of you and you now?
I like that question. I don't know that I've ever been asked that question. I was definitely less sure of myself looking back. I always knew I wasn't going to do financial planning forever. I was fairly successful in it. I think I did it for about 8 or 9 years. Really successful. I enjoyed it. I found significance and meaning in it, but it wasn't that thing, that I felt like I was really supposed to do. So I always felt a little bit unsure and unsteady. I always felt like this isn't really my place. I'm here LARPing, role playing in this space, and I'm doing a fairly good job at it, but I just don't feel like myself. I don't like wearing the clothes I was wearing. I didn't have a beard at the time. And also too, I really wasn't taking care of myself mentally, physically, and emotionally the way that I do now. So there was a lot at play there. And I see pictures every once in a while. In fact, if you typed in Wealth Anatomy, you might actually be able to find the podcast cover. I think it's still on the interweb somewhere. And somebody sent me a picture of my old business card, and I just look so awkward and out of place. And a lot of that could have been as a result of doing something that I didn't really feel 100% compelled to do. And it could have just been that I was just insecure and trying to find my footing and trying to be a successful man with a fairly young family. And here we are, and I'm not 100% confident in myself even today, but I'm definitely further along the path than I was 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear because, I mean, from my perspective, I'm 25. I just turned 25 in May. I don't know. Maybe there's a point where you get like 100% confident in yourself, but I mean, I find it hard to believe that there's like ever this pinnacle that you reach where you kind of sit back and be like, oh, here I am. I'm like fully actualized. That's why I love this journey and the journey of Order of Man and things in the similar arena. It's almost like for me at least, I'll speak from my experience. In the year that I've been doing this, I've learned 10 times more about myself and about my life than I did in the 24, 23 years leading up to it. I don't know if you can relate to that, but it's been such a potent like self-development for me.
Yeah, I think that's what happens when you become a student, right? Is a lot of the times people believe they're in high school, and once they finish high school, they'll learn everything they need to learn to be successful. And then a percentage of those people are going to go on to college. And once they get done with their bachelor's or their master's or PhD, doctorate, whatever they're going for, they think, oh, okay, well, I'm good now. Now I'm going to go into my career and live out the rest of my life. But when we learn to become, as Ryan Hawk would say, he runs a podcast called, I think it's called The Learning Leader. He talks about being a lifelong learner. And so that's what you're talking about. You're customizing your learning experience. You can't really do that in college. Yes, you have a degree, a route that you're going, but you get to customize what you want to learn based on the conversations you want to have, which I like because then it keeps me engaged. I don't need to go learn about calculus because that's not really something that's going to be entirely relevant in my life, but I really would like to know how to have a conversation with my daughter or to learn how to lose excess fat. Like I can customize it to what I want to learn. And that's really, really powerful. And that's the beauty of podcasting in general. Even if you don't have a podcast, is you might listen to your podcast because they have an affiliation or like what you have to share, or listen to mine, or maybe they don't like either of us and then go find 1,000 other podcasts that they can listen to. But you can really be selective today on the type of information you want to gather. It's just a matter of, are you carving time out to do it? Are you deliberate and intentional about that time? And are you maximizing your hours in the day to do this sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I've never thought about like the abundance of choices you have in terms of choosing your curriculum. I've never used that phrase before. I like that a lot though, because it's for us as well being podcasters, but like when I listen to podcasts, it's the exact same thing. On that note,
Well, think about this, Nolan, if I can say one other thing on that.
Yeah.
Imagine, okay, so let's say somebody's deciding if they're going to go to college. They're going to spend 4 years minimum in classrooms, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. They're not going to be able to go work. And if they do, it's going to be minimal. They're going to spend 80 on the low side, $80,000 on the high side, a couple $100,000, maybe even more, depending on your degree. Or, and I'm not saying this needs to be or, I'm just showing you an alternative, is if I spent the same amount of time really being deliberate and intentional about the podcasts I listen to and the emails that I sign up for and the courses that I purchase, I could get a degree equivalent in less time, hyper focused on something that's pertinent to me, and significantly less investment, monetarily anyways. So I'm not saying it's a replacement for formal education, but I'm saying if you're deliberate and intentional about the information you're consuming, you can walk out of that same time frame with a degree equivalency that's going to be more relevant to your life.
100%. Did you go to college out of curiosity?
I went to half a semester. I got a academic scholarship to go here to, it was Dixie State University here in Southern Utah. I went through half a semester, and I remember I was in an English class, and the teacher or professor, she said, here, we're going to do a report on this or whatever. And I can't remember what it was. And after class, I asked her, why? Like, I don't understand the point of this. And she said, well, this is just something we have to do. I'm like, not me. Threw my book on the table and left. And, I got a letter a month later, and it said, you've lost your academic scholarship for low attendance. And I'm like, good. And I've never looked back. I've been openly critical about higher education, and people with degrees always take it the wrong way because they don't want to feel like their time and energy and money was wasted. So I can certainly understand the bias there. But the reality is that unless you're in the STEM professions, a college degree is becoming less and less relevant. If you're a scientist, if you're a doctor, if you're an attorney or a CPA, some sort of engineer, like I said, the STEM professions, okay, that makes some sense. But if you're going to college and you're walking away with a liberal arts degree in gender dance theory, why are you doing that? You're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, and you could be living your life actually making a difference in other people's lives. To me, that's significantly more relevant than banging your head against the wall in these educational institutions.
Yeah, that's a great point. I am saying this as somebody who graduated from an undergrad and then also got a graduate certificate. Because I played baseball in college, and that was like, looking back, I don't use my degree at all, either of them right now. Like,
can I ask what your degree is in?
It was in real estate. So at some point, I would like to actualize a little bit of the knowledge, but even then, I don't really remember much, to be honest. I was kind of there. I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to enjoy the college experience. I chose a degree that I thought would be useful, which I don't regret, but I actually align with you in terms of the overall perspective on college. I think we've been pushed for a long time, especially people my age. Like, it was just assumed that I was going to college, and a lot of my friends. Mm-hmm. But I've come to learn, especially through communicating with folks like yourself and other people on the podcast, and even friends that I've met that didn't go to college. I firmly believe that it's not for everybody. I don't think you have to go to college. It's like this, where I'm from. I mean, it's like probably most suburbs in America. It's kind of just an assumption, like, oh, you have to go to college. I don't think that's really the case. And there's this idea. I think it's Robert Kiyosaki, the financial teacher, coach, author. I think he said something along the lines of college teaches you how to be an employee, which I find to be a really interesting framework to look at it, because I really do agree with that. I don't know about your thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear them.
Yeah, I think so. I don't really think college for the most part, teaches you how to think. It teaches you what to think. And so you get a lot of biases in your indoctrination. And I'm using that very deliberately. Like that's what's happening is you're learning about these biases, and most of them are very left leaning. Most of them are very woke. And so there's a real problem in college institutions outside of just what is being taught from an academic standpoint. There's also the cultural lessons that are dangerous and destructive ideologies that I get frustrated with. I don't think we need to have millions and millions of kids going through these indoctrination centers to come out with communist and socialist ideologies ingrained and embedded into their DNA. I think it's dangerous for this country. But yeah, I mean, even real estate, like you can use that, and there are things that you're going to be able to take away from that. There's another benefit of college that I don't often talk about is who goes to college? Well, doctors, lawyers, accountants, CPAs, people who are successful. So the one benefit that I think there's plenty, but one of the benefits is that you are by default going to be friends with successful people. So I always say the caveat to not going to college is not that you can just then dink around. It's that you're going to be deliberate and intentional about building out a network, about gaining new information that's relevant and pertinent to your life and career path, about going out and getting hired somewhere and having some experience or doing an apprenticeship and getting some valuable on-the-job training. So I always say that because I don't ever want it to feel like, oh, don't go to college, you'll just figure it out. No, still be intentional, but just make it something that's going to be more relevant and applicable in your life. 100%
agree. And that's to your point, other than the actual baseball experience and all the lessons that I learned there and the fun and just all like that I loved playing baseball in college. That was an incredible experience. But the number one thing that I think I'll take away is I was blessed to go to a school where there's kids from a lot of places. So I have friends from Hawaii, Texas, California, Washington, New York,
right.
Florida, literally everywhere. Like I could go to all these states and have a friend that I am connected with, which I think is, I don't know how it's really manifested yet, but I think it'll manifest in a very valuable way down the road.
It will. Those people are going to be lifelong friends. Some of them, they're going to be potential business partners. They're going to be confidants. They're going to be people who, if you were to get into politics, that are going to back you and support you. There's so much value. I think that's probably the number one value of college and higher education is the network that you're building out. So if you're not going to go to college, then you damn well better be focusing on building your own personal network because you're going to need that as you grow and develop and mature and try to reach your goals and objectives.
Yeah, there's the saying, it's not about the grades you make, it's about the hands you shake.
I never heard that, but that's 100% true. Yeah, I like that.
I took it to heart when I heard that. I think I heard it like late in high school. I'm like, okay, duly noted. I'll go through college understanding that.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Before we get too far away from it, the podcasting thing, I'm so curious. I mean, you said you have almost 500 conversations with other individuals, which is like just a note on that for me. Like you're a great example. Ryan, if I was in Southern Utah and I said, hey man, I'd love to take an hour of your time to have a coffee. I've never met you before. The likelihood of you saying yes is very, very low. But right. The medium of podcasting is this level of social proof and reciprocal value. Like I'm providing you at least some value by giving you a platform. You're obviously providing me value by having this conversation. You've been able to do that with 500 people, and I'm assuming all 500 of them have had some level of insight to share with you. I'm curious if there's any lessons that stick out from those conversations. Like, is there one or two lessons that are potent in your mind that you can trace back to the podcast?
That's such a hard question for me to answer because I have had so many conversations, and a lot of what I've learned, I've heard over and over again in different ways from different people, because most successful people have some things figured out, and there's a lot of overlap between the way somebody like JOCKO Willink did it and somebody like Terry Crews or Matthew McConaughey or Ben Shapiro or David Goggins. Like all these people that I've had on, they all have success in their own right, and they're all doing very similar things. So it's hard for me to point to one thing because I think at this point, a lot of what I hear, and if I hear, over and over again, it's ingrained into who I am now. I couldn't even tell you like, oh, I learned this on this day from this person. But there are memorable conversations I've had. One that really stands out to me is with a man by the name of John Eldridge. He wrote the book Wild at Heart. And Wild at Heart is one of my favorite books. Yeah, it sounds like you too. Man, that book literally transformed and changed my life in a very positive and powerful way. And so to be able to have a conversation with John twice about his perception of masculinity, and the thing that I really like about John, although I don't always agree with some of the spiritual and Christian undertones that he may have, although I am Christian, I don't agree with all of that, especially in my delivery. The thing that I really like about John is he's unapologetic about his beliefs and his conviction and what it means to be a man. I think if there's one lesson that I've learned that I could really take away from all of my guests, it's that whatever they're doing, they fully believe in it and they're unapologetic about it. So that's what I try to be. I try to do that in a respectful, considerate, thoughtful way, but I'm unapologetic about the things that I believe. And I'm also open to hearing something else. And if I need to adjust, I can, but I'll never apologize for believing the things I believe. One thing that's always interesting is sometimes I'll make a comment on a podcast. Maybe I'm going to say something today on this conversation, and somebody will come and say, well, you know, when you started podcasting, you said this, and now you're saying this. Well, of course, because I'm a human being and I'm capable of learning and evolving and growing and considering new information. It would be kind of weird and pathetic, quite frankly, if I thought all the same things that I did as a 43-year-old man that I thought as a 35-year-old man. So that's always interesting to me. But yeah, I'm not going to make any apologies for the way that I feel. And I'm never going to stop talking about the things that are important to me, even if it rubs people the wrong way.
That's so valuable. What you just said reminded me of one of my favorite quotes. If you don't think yourself 3 years ago was an idiot, you're still an idiot. And I think it's so true, especially like the way that it just came to my mind when you were speaking is like people who are afraid of hypocrisy are really the ones who don't learn, because you're exactly right. Like people can go back. You've had all these conversations from 10 years. Like if you had the same exact opinion from 10 years ago, what's the point of having these conversations? Right? Like that's why you have them to learn.
And I don't even think it's hypocrisy to change your mind. Hypocrisy is believing one thing, but acting in a different way, or even telling other people that they should do this and those rules apply to them, but they don't apply to you. And I've even had some people will claim that I had some hypocrisy because I had some really open struggles with alcohol abuse. And a year and a half ago, I finalized a divorce with my ex-wife. That was an 18-year marriage. And so people were saying, well, you're being hypocritical. No, it's not hypocritical, because what I was sharing, it wasn't something that I didn't believe in. I fully believed in it. It just goes to show that even though you know what you should be doing, it's still very difficult as a human being to always do what you know you should be doing. You know, if you look at health, for example, if I were to go ask 100 random people today, hey, can you give me 2 or 3 pointers on being healthy? All of them would say, eat a little cleaner, exercise a little more, and try to be as active as you possibly can throughout the day. All of them would say that. Okay, if everybody knows that, why do we have such an obesity epidemic? Why is there so much unnecessary illness due to health issues? It's not that they don't have the information. It's that they're having a difficult time applying it, as do we all. And that's one thing I've always tried to do in my podcast to varying degrees, is bridge the gap between what we know we should be doing and what we're actually doing in theory, or in practice. So that's really, really important for me.
Yeah, I appreciate the challenge on the hypocrisy word, because I agree with you. There's a verse, I believe it's in Romans, where I think Paul wrote Romans, but I think Paul said something like, I do what I hate, and I do not do what I love. Like, even though I know what I want to do. And I think that speaks to what you're saying exactly the same. Like, because for me, that's something that I've dealt with, or will continue to deal with, is like a level of just being able to show myself grace and understanding that there's no way, it's almost arrogant for me to assume that I'd ever be able to act perfectly. And when I do fall short, understanding that and learning, but not letting that, like, quote, failure be final, if that makes sense. There's a level of grace that I've been learning how to cultivate in my own life. And I think that speaks to what you're saying as well.
I think grace is coupled really well with responsibility, because if you don't have either of those things, it could go poorly. I know a lot of people who afford themselves a lot of grace, but they take no responsibility in their life for improvement. They're like, well, my parents, well, it's understandable because of this and because of that. And they come up with all these justifications and lies and excuses as to why they're performing poorly. That's where responsibility comes in. Okay, maybe some of those things are true, but you now have a responsibility, especially because you've identified what's going wrong, to actually improve in your life. And then conversely, if all you have is responsibility, you're probably going to be way too hard on yourself, and it's going to create some mental and emotional unnecessary struggle, because you're taking responsibility for everything, and you're putting it all on your shoulders. You're not allowing anybody else in life to contribute or participate, and you're not allowing yourself to be a human being. So I think when you have grace with responsibility, you can really become a very, very powerful force in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, I just wrote that down. I've never thought about that before. I've never thought about those two things going together that tightly, but I think that makes a lot of sense. When you mentioned something earlier, which I think ties into exactly what you just mentioned. You said something to the effect of like what you're doing now, like specifically serving men. I'm curious as to why you felt compelled to do that. Why'd you feel compelled to start Order of Man in the service of men at large?
That's because that's what I know. I don't have any other great answer other than I know that I had some holes and deficiencies in my life, and maybe not even holes and deficiencies, but some areas that I wanted to improve upon. And I thought, well, I'm sure there's a bunch of guys like me. So that's the only reason, is I don't know what it's like to be a woman. Now, sometimes I'll have women who will say, well, this applies to women as well. Well, sure, of course it does. Because a lot of what we're talking about is just general self-development and self-help. But I talk about it from a man's perspective to a man, and my delivery is intentional in a way that I think men will receive it and act upon it. And I do that because that's what I know. And the experiences that I've had in my life, the good experiences and some of the bad experiences, as I talk openly about those things, I talk with dozens, if not hundreds of men every single week who are dealing with the same thing. When I talked about my alcohol addiction and struggles, the more I talked about that, the more men talked to me about what they were dealing with, whether it was alcohol abuse or drug abuse or other addictions like pornography and sex addiction. When we talk about our own problems, we become magnetic to the individuals that have similar problems that want to overcome those things. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to appeal to guys like me who have problems like me, and we can work on them together. I might be a little further ahead on some issues than others, and other men might be a little further ahead than me on other issues. But if we can work together, we can solve our own problems. I can't really do that, as I don't think, as effectively for women, because I'm not a woman. I'm not really privy to the way women deal with problems. Now, we can read books on psychology and human understanding and interpersonal communication, and we should, because we need to learn those things. But I'll never have the entirety of that perspective. So I think there's a woman out there who could do a really good job helping women go through the same problems that she is.
Yeah, and one thing I just remembered in Wild at Heart, I'm pretty sure John Eldredge addresses this because it's a book for men, but I think he encourages women to read it as well so that they can perhaps have a better understanding of the men in their life and the issues that they're having or the challenges that they have to overcome. I'm pretty sure that he mentioned that, which I think is exactly what you're saying. That it was just interesting to me because I think you do a really good job of that. I think it's, as a young man, I appreciate the intentionality with which you and other people as well, but with which you address and are intentional with your message and the the overall ethos of you and Order of Man. I think it's important because like you said, to those people that have similar addictions or are working through similar problems, it feels like you're speaking to me as opposed to just like some broad spectrum of human, which is obviously less relatable and then less impactful.
Well, that's the thing. Let's say I've got 10 guys and we're all dealing with very similar problems. So I talk specifically about those problems in a way that resonates with the men who are listening. and they're all excited. They're grateful for what we're doing. They're making improvements and strides in their life. And then all of a sudden I decide, hey, you know what, guys, I'm still going to address those problems, but I'm going to widen this out so we can talk with children and we can talk with women. And so we're still going to address it, but we're going to talk about it differently. It just waters it down. You know, we have podcasts and we have access to emails and courses and newsletters and programs and conferences. And everybody wants to appeal to the widest audience possible. I'm not really interested in that, because if I do that, then it's not as potent and powerful to the people who could actually otherwise be served. It's like a shotgun approach as opposed to like a sniper-like approach. Maybe this is a little too soon coming off the back of an attempted assassination on the president, but I still think the metaphor stands. If I just take a shotgun and I just spray it, I mean, I'm probably going to hit a few people here or there. But if I take a sniper rifle and I focus on what that is, then I'm hyper-focused and it's much more accurate, it's much more potent, and you're actually going to get the job done. So maybe a little bit of a insensitive metaphor, you know, right now, considering the climate and what just happened, but it rings true. It makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And like I just mentioned, I'm one of those people that appreciates that approach because it's impacted me, and I'm certain that it's impacted probably, I don't know how many downloads and how many people you've come into contact, hundreds of thousands, not millions of other men, which is pretty.
Hundreds of millions at this point.
That's incredible.
That's wild.
As somebody who's like still in like the infancy stages of the podcast, it's just so cool. On that note, this is a question that just came to mind. What's that like when you look back at, you mentioned the David Goggins, the JOCKO Willink, who is like on the pinnacle for me. I would love to have a conversation. I don't know if there's been any podcaster or figure that's had more potent impact on me. Like the JOCKO Willinks, the David Goggins, the John Eldridges. What's it like looking back, knowing you've had those people, you've had conversations with those folks, and like hundreds of millions of people have tuned into your conversation? Do you think about like when you first started and the progress that you've made ever?
I don't really actually think about that a whole lot. I played baseball too, but I never played in college. I played in high school, and I had a baseball coach. His name's Matt Labrum. He's actually still a friend of mine today, 20 plus years later. And he had one saying, he had a lot, but one saying in particular, he says, you're only as good as your last at bat. And too many people ride their previous successes. I don't do that. So great. I've had JOCKO on and Goggins on and Matthew McConaughey and Terry Crews and Tim Tebow. Like, I've had incredible guys on the podcast. None of that is relevant to me today. It really matters who I'm going to have on the podcast today and what valuable information do they have to share with the people that we're trying to impact. So, I mean, I'll look back and laugh at my early days of podcasting, or, you know, be excited about some of the work that we've done, but I really don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that because it's irrelevant. What am I going to do today, and what plans do I have for tomorrow? That's the most relevant thing to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good reframe. The one thing that I think you just mentioned, like the work that you've done, the Iron Council, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw on your website it has like 1,200 members. Yeah,
I think we have fewer members than that, right around 1,000 at this point. But yeah, we've had tens of thousands of men over 9 years go through our programs, courses, and the Iron Council.
What's that been like? Because to me, like I have this, there's this paradigm I have for social media. I think you can either be used by it or you can use it. And one of the ways that you can use it is finding and attracting and connecting with people who are in similar boats. And I think that's so important. Obviously, we need connection with people who are aligned with us. And a way that you can do that is a place like Iron Council. What's that like, being able to provide that structure or that place for men, like thousands of men, like you just mentioned?
I mean, I love it. I feel like, to your point earlier, I'm the biggest beneficiary of the work that we're doing. So these guys will come in, and we've got programs and systems in place to make sure that they can actually achieve the goals they set out to achieve. But in the process, I'm learning. I'm learning about marketing. I'm learning about communicating with men. I'm learning how to lead men. I'm learning how to be kind and more empathetic. I'm learning the same subjects they are, because I'm going through the same subjects and the same books that these guys are. One of the biggest problems I had when I started Order of Man was that I couldn't really find guys who were interested in the same type of growth that I was at the time. It was very difficult to do. And as a young man yourself, I'm probably willing to bet that a lot of the guys in your circle or, are more interested in girls and parties and everything else than they are about self-development like you're working on. So you can sit around and you can complain about it and say, oh, there's nobody who wants to do it. Or you can create something. You can do it. And the benefit of you doing it is that you can create the solutions to your problems by including other people who have the same problems. So I feel really blessed and honored to be able to serve the guys that come into the Iron Council and our programs the way they do. And I also feel a little selfish because the benefits of what we're doing, I benefit from greatly.
Yeah, that reminds me of a mentor of mine always says, I think somebody else said it, but he related to me that like, if you give enough people what they want, you get what you want.
Yeah, Zig Ziglar.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. The nature of that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like the value that we give, and this is something I'm working on, like with the business that I work with, and with the podcast. Like how can I maximize the amount of value that I can get in a non-selfish way, because it's providing people with value, and then trusting that in the long run that will be paid back, if that makes sense. It sounds that's exactly the way that you view it.
Yeah, I mean, people will say, "Oh, it's selfish." You don't even need to worry about that. It's just the law of reciprocity. The more I think about this, even with romantic relationships, I've been divorced for a little over a year and a half. I've been dating a woman for about 8 months, and we have a great relationship. I want to serve her. Like, I want to add a value to her life. I want to be an asset to what she has going on. I want to be a contributor to her life, and I want her life to be better because I'm in it. And I will be served by doing that. I just know that's the case. She'll want to reciprocate. She'll want to be an asset. She'll want to serve me. She'll want to do things that make me feel like she's an important part of my life. So we don't really need to get too hung up on whether or not it's selfish. It just is. It's a principle. There's another quote that comes from a networking organization that I was part of for a long time. And it's very simply this: givers gain. It's called Business Network International. But the phrase is givers gain. Those who give gain the most. It's not selfish. It just is the law of reciprocity. So if you want more in your life, give more away. That's what you have to do. Think about it in the context of relationships. If you want to have better relationships with the people around you, be a better partner, be a better friend, be a better brother. Invest in those people. You want to build financial prosperity and abundance? Invest your money, deploy your resources, because it will be returned to you. You want to be healthier? Go to the gym, invest in supplements, invest in the right nutrients and food that you can put in, invest in a membership, and then you will be given back. But you have to give in order to get. And the more you give, the more abundant you'll be able to be in life.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I won't even try to add anything onto that. That was pretty well said. One thing that if you listen to any amount of your podcasts, especially recently, like you're a very eloquent speaker. And I've learned this in the last 30 minutes. Is that something, like when you were a financial advisor, was that something that you had as well? Or is that a skill that you've cultivated because you have the ability now to speak in a very commanding and eloquent way, which is a necessary skill, I think.
I think so. And I appreciate that. Thank you for the compliment. It's probably a bit of both. I like presenting in public. I remember when I was little, I must have been in 6th grade, maybe 7th grade. And I was part of the student council. And we had an assembly coming up where each member of the student council was to take a few seconds and explain some feature of the council or some initiative we were working on for the student body, et cetera, et cetera. And the teacher who was in charge of the student council had us go and rehearse together what our lines were going to be and what we were going to talk about. So I went to this assembly, and I think I must have been maybe the 5th or 6th person to talk. And we were all lined up in front of the entire school. And the first person went, the second person, third person, they all said what they were going to talk about, and they stayed on course. The person right before me, they got to her. She said everything that I was supposed to say. Almost verbatim. Just stole everything I was supposed to say. And I remember in that moment just freezing up. And it got to me. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't prepared. It was one of the most embarrassing experiences. I mean, I'm 43 years old, and I still remember the time when I was 12 being completely embarrassed because this happened. And I remember vividly vowing, I will never let that happen again. So I've put myself in positions that are uncomfortable, especially as it comes to public speaking, presenting, communicating ideas. And I don't think I've always been I wouldn't say as eloquent as I am, because I don't think that's the case, but I don't think I've always been as articulate as I am now. But that's just come through practice and repetition, knowing my material, being excited about what I want to talk about, and then maybe a little bit of those bad experiences that just forced me or pushed me towards not being in that position again. I never want to be in that position again. And I never have been. I might at some point, but I'm never at a loss for words. So there you go.
Well, that's an interesting. I think that I bet you most people listening to this, and most people in the world, at least in the Western world, public speaking, I remember being like the source of the most anxiety in school. Like when kids would have to present in biology for their project, or like a social
totally.
Report, people would freak out. I remember having like classmates that would have like full blown panic attacks. And to me, I guess my dad sort of always, he's like a communicator in a lot of ways. He always pushed me. Like, he always told me it was a good thing. So I never had that, like that frame in my mind where like, oh my gosh, this is so scary. He was like, he always framed it as a really good thing and a really positive and cool thing that you get to do. But I do remember kids having like full blown panic attacks when they had to present like a 1 minute PowerPoint slide. So it's just an interesting thing. I think it's something a lot of people relate to. So I was curious to hear how you've like sort of cultivated that. It sounds like putting yourself in a position to public speak is probably one of the bigger solutions.
I mean, there's all sorts of opportunities, and it's not comfortable, but you can go to a program like Toastmasters and practice speaking. There's probably opportunities to speak in organizations like Chamber of Commerce or Rotary. When I was in Business Network International, every week there would be a presenter, and I would tell the president, if a presenter doesn't show up or isn't ready, I will speak on anything you want on a moment's notice. And some of the members would get upset with me because I was getting more speaking time than they were. And I told them, the only reason I'm getting more speaking time is because I'm ready to speak. And I told them, if somebody doesn't show up, I'll step in and do it. You could give me a subject and I can talk about it for 10 minutes. Come on. You should be able to do that. But I also try to instill this into my kids. Things, very simple things. Like, here's one. When we go out to eat at a restaurant, I've never ordered food for my children. From the time that they could talk. I don't.
It'd be hard for them to order prior.
It'd be a little difficult, right? But from the moment they could talk, I would tell them, "Hey, I'm not ordering your food." And a few of them would always kind of put up a stink. I'm like, "You can either order it or not eat. Those are your two options." And they were timid at first and uncomfortable with it. And now they look the server right in the eye. They explain exactly what they want. The server will ask a different question. Sometimes the servers look at me. I'm like, "Why are you looking at me? Ask them the question. I'm not ordering. They're ordering it." But it's things like that. When we meet people, I expect my children to look other people in the eye, extend their hand, shake their hand, and tell them their name. "Hi, I am so-and-so," and ask who they are. I remember one vivid moment. My oldest son, he's 16 now, but at the time he must have been 11 or 12. And we run these events, and we were in Maine at the time, and we had this big event where 100 guys were coming to our property for this week-long event. And there's a gentleman, he's a good friend of mine. His name is Brandon Lilly. He is a mountain of a man, and he's very scary and intimidating looking. Kindest person you'll ever meet, but looks very scary. He's huge. He's muscular. He's strong. Tattoos from head to toe. He's just an intimidating figure. And I'll never forget when my son was, like I said, 11 or 12 years old. He knew Brandon was coming. He was excited to meet him. And he marched right up to Brandon without any prompting, and he did exactly that. He looked that man right in his eyes. He extended his hands, and he said, "Hey, I'm Brecken. I've been excited to meet you." And I think Brandon was a little shocked, a little taken back, because how often do you have an 11-year-old kid come up to you with that level of assertiveness? It's just practice. Those are the expectations in this household. And so we take the reps, and our kids are fairly decent communicators because of it.
Yeah, that's valuable to hear. Even as like a grown man, I think about, or I guess a young man, but I think about ways that I can still instill that. Like, how can I cultivate that communication skill? And one thing that I can stem back, and maybe you can relate to this as well. I remember you play baseball, you have coaches, and I had phones when I was playing travel baseball. You obviously didn't have that. But if there was ever a thing, I remember these vividly, where like I'd have to miss practice, or if something happened in the game, I got injured. My parents would make me tell the coaches. I remember being like a 12-year-old kid having to tell my coach I'm missing practice. I'm like, oh crap. Like, what do I do here? I like, this is because this is a grown man. I'm 12. I'm like, okay, well, figure it out. And that's something that I can 100% attribute positive results over the course of my life, just being able to communicate in those situations. It sounds like you do the exact same thing with your children.
Well, I had an experience when I was a senior. My baseball coach benched me. And I was so upset about it. And I started complaining to my mom. And she's like, I don't know why he benched you. Go talk with him. He's your coach. And she was so good about that. So I pressed on her more and more. She's like, no, I'm not talking to your coach. That's your responsibility. So eventually I went and talked to my coach, and we had it out, and it was a good, productive conversation because she made me do that. And I think even as a man now, or woman, probably more so, I think a man, there's ways to practice this even in public now. Part of that is just introducing yourself to people or being creative and striking up conversations. That's a really, really cool exercise. It's very difficult to do, but if you're at the grocery store, make an effort with no motive other than just learning how to introduce yourself to people using creative, interesting angles. So if somebody's in the fruit section and they pick up a fruit you're not familiar with, then I think a good exercise would be like, oh, are those good? I've seen those, but I don't even know what those are. Are those good? And it's amazing how often you can strike up conversations. Again, it's no motive there other than just to strike up a conversation and get you thinking creatively on your feet to connect and communicate with people. I love doing stuff like that just to sharpen my skills.
Wow, that's something I've never thought about. That's I can imagine, because there's a level of like awkwardness there that you have to overcome as well. I like that a lot. I'm going to try to do that when I go to the grocery store today. One thing, I don't know if
another one is the elevator. Sorry. Oh, yeah. I was going to say another, like, how many times do you get in an elevator and everybody's like, they're looking down. They don't look at each other. Try to strike up a conversation with somebody. Like, just try. Hey, those are cool shoes, man. I've been looking at those. Do you like those? Or whatever. I mean, come up with something, right? Like, try to connect with people. You'll get way better at it if you do.
Yeah, there's so many examples. I mean, there's infinite examples, crossing someone in the street, whatever it is. But are you familiar with a guy named Greg Lappin? He lives in Utah as well. He works up at Fieldcraft Survival.
Oh, no. I know Fieldcraft. I know Mike, but I don't know Greg.
He's the head of jiu-jitsu at Fieldcraft, and I had him on the show a couple months ago. He's a great dude. And he shared something with me that I to this day, I will continue to implement it in my life. He referred to like the phones and the self-checkouts and all these, especially during COVID, you have like the contactless delivery, the contactless whatever it is. And he posited that it's all taking people away from that. So he challenged me and I guess the listeners to, so I don't use self-checkout anymore. Unless I'm in like a rush, I used to always go to the self-checkout for the exact same reason that you just mentioned. I go to the regular checkout now. And what I've noticed is having conversations with these cashiers, like a lot of the times I'll leave smiling. Like one lady, I was talking to her daughter who played volleyball at Florida, and we started talking about how I played college athletics. It's just cool how that happens, and it's something that you don't get when you do the contactless delivery or the self checkout or whatever. So that's an interesting practice that I've been doing in the same vein.
Yeah, I love that, and it's going to help you be a better networker, a better communicator, and you're going to make all sorts of connections that some are going to be nothing, and others could turn into something down the road, whether it's romantic relationships or business partnerships or just having friends, and contacts wherever you go, like you were talking about earlier.
And just like the value of leaving with a smile on my face from the grocery store. True. I would have just had my head down, and hopefully the lady or the cashier that I'm talking to also has a smile. I mean, it's the little things like that just kind of like you build momentum throughout the day. I've 100% noticed a positive ROI on that little tiny practice. It might take like 3 minutes longer. I don't care anymore. It's something I'll continue to do. I think we only got time for like one. We got like 5 minutes left. This is a question that I used to ask at the beginning or at the end of every podcast. I kind of got away from it, but so the Tyro Experience is the name of the podcast. Have you ever heard the word Tyro before?
No.
I say this all the time. I've never met somebody that knows the word, which I kind of like. It means novice or beginner. and it stems from the Latin word meaning young soldier. To kind of speak to our student conversation earlier, continually being a student. That's really the ethos of this podcast for me. I started it because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had a conversation with my mom, and she's like, "Why don't you just talk to people?" So, long story short, here I am talking to people and learning. My question, because the way that I viewed Tyro at the beginning, like what a Tyro was, it's a novice or beginner. It's a young soldier. It's somebody who's in the arena and is not cowering, is not like trying to escape the arena. They've put themselves there. They understand they're there, and they're sword in hand running towards the middle. So my question to you is, what arena are you in? What's the arena that you're running towards the center of, sword in hand?
I mean, for me, it's the cause and champion of masculinity and manliness. You know, we're in society today, we are devoid of so many strong, bold, courageous, assertive men. And I recognized that about a decade ago and made that my life's mission. I'm a beneficiary. I'm a recipient of the work that we're doing. Yes. But also it's my goal to have millions and millions of men be better fathers, husbands, leaders in their communities, business owners, to be bold, to be courageous, to take risks, meaningful and significant risks, and make the world a better place. So I hope that answers the question if I'm understanding you correctly. But yeah, that's the arena I'm in. And I've planted my flag here, and I'm not stepping down from this thing ever.
No, that answers the question beautifully. I think that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And as I mentioned many times, I appreciate you being in that arena and planting your flag and sharing the message and learning and being open and vulnerable. I don't need to tell you this, but I will. You have impacted myself and millions of other men. So I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank you very much for coming on the show and spending an hour with me. It's been a real honor and a real privilege.
Likewise, me too. Can I share one more thing about that concept? Tyro, it's called, that concept?
Yeah, TYRO. Go ahead.
So you're talking about young soldier. I think there's a lot of young men who will listen to your podcast and certainly listen to mine who are really confused about, how do I get started, or how do I find my mission or my arena, if you will. And maybe they didn't have a father figure around. There's a lot of reasons for that. But here's what I would suggest to those individuals is look at life. This is a mindset thing, but look at life as a process of experiments. When a scientist is going to experiment, he has a hypothesis, and then he sets up the experiment and then does it, and then does the review after. Did it meet my hypothesis? Did what I think would happen, did that happen, or did something else happen? And so that scientist is going to experiment. In life, we need to do the same thing. I think if we began to look at life more as a process of experimentation, we would give ourselves more permission to take risks, to do uncomfortable things, to afford ourselves a little leniency and grace when things don't work out exactly the way they should. But to me, if you look at it as an experiment, you're giving yourself permission to do it. Too often, men think that if I go down this path, I have to stay on this path and I have to make it work. That isn't true. There's so many things that you're going to do in life that you're not meant to do. Or maybe that was just for a season and now you can move on to something else. But look at life as a process of experimentation. Allow yourself to fail. Allow yourself to mess up. Allow yourself to learn something you didn't learn before. And I think you'll have a lot more success doing things that maybe otherwise you'd be too afraid to do.
Wow, I appreciate you sharing that insight. That's powerful. And I think that speaks to the ethos of the experience of Tyro, the experience of being a novice and a young soldier. So I appreciate that. I'm sure that will hit home for a lot of folks.
I hope so. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it, man.